Funding for this program is provided by the Herb Alpert Foundation and by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Corporate funding is provided by Mutual of America, building America's future through pension and retirement plans, encouraging dialogue and discussion. The Spirit of America, Mutual of America.
Running, and time is clocking us from the edge like an only daughter. Our mothers stream before us, cradling their breasts in their hands. Oh, pray that what we want is worth this running. Pray that what we're running toward is what we want.
After making love, we hear footsteps. Or maybe I don't have to read that one.
This is called Monday in B flat. I can pray all day and God won't come. But if I call 911, the devil be here in a minute.
I'm never going to sleep with Martin Amis or anyone famous.
There was a time when a man said poems and friendship grew visible. You know, we have fallen into the place where everything is music. And that's what this place feels like. We feel this vast interconnectedness. It's amazing that this many people can be really genuinely excited about fooling with words.
It's the largest poetry festival in North America. 12,000 people mixing and mingling with scores of poets. Everywhere you turn, there are words, music, movement. For 4 days during the Geraldine R. Dodge Poetry Festival, the restored 19th century village of Waterloo, New Jersey, beats to the pounding heart of poetry.
That's the beautiful thing about being here. They call it a festival. It's like a carnival, you know, and you the ride. You know, you can be a roller coaster if you want or whatever.
Pretty summer day. Grandmama sitting on a porch, easy, rocking her grandbaby in her wide lap. Old men sitting in their Lincoln, tasting and talking and talking and tasting. Young boys on the corner milking a yak-yak. Wild hands, baggy pants. Young girls halfway up the block playing, jumping that double dutch, singing their song. They say, Kenny kind of Paula, be on time, 'cause school begins at 1:15. They jump 1, 2, 3, and Round the corner comes this young woman, dragging herself heavy home from work. She sees the young boys, she sees the old men, but when she sees those girls, she just starts smiling. She said, let me get a little bit of that. They say, you can't jump, you too old. Why they say that? Why they say that? She said, Tanya, you hold my work bag. Shanika, come over here, girl, I want you to hold my handbag. Josie, hold my grocery bags, please. Kebe, take my purse. Then she started bobbing her head, jacking her arms, trying to catch the rhythm of the ropes. And then she jumps inside those turning loops. The girls crowd her, sing their song. They say, Kenny kind of Paula, be on time, 'cause school begins at 1:15. And jump 1, 2, 3, and She jumping around on one leg, they say, She dancing sassy, saucy, Jump for the girls, mama, jump for the stars, mama, jump for the young boys saying, jump, mama, jump, mama. Jump for the old men saying, jump, mama. Jump for the old woman saying, oh, go ahead, baby. And what the young girls say? What the young girl say? Jump mama, jump mama, jump mama, jump mama. Okay.
The poem is on its way in search of people. For its complete fulfillment, it has to have an audience. It has to be in touch with other human beings.
The poet. She is working now in a room not unlike this one, the one where I write or you read. Her table is covered with paper. The light of the lamp would be tempered by a shade where the bulb's single harshness might dissolve, but it is not. She has taken it off. Her poems, I will never know them, though they are the ones I most need. Even the alphabet she writes in, I cannot decipher. Her chair, let us imagine whether it is leather or canvas, vinyl or wicker. Let her have a chair, her shadeless lamp, the table. Let one or two she loves be in the next room. Let the door be closed, the sleeping ones healthy. Let her have time and silence, enough paper to make mistakes and go on. Thank you.
Do you remember when you first started writing poetry, what you were doing?
I took to writing as soon as I was taught to write. I wrote all through my childhood. I wrote for school. I wrote secretly in the middle of the night and hid it under my mattress. It was the field in which I developed the self that I became. I've always done it. And so I have no recollection of how it started.
You're not the first poet to tell me that he or she started writing very early and wrote secretly and hid the poems away, put them up in the closet or under the mattress.
That's
Why do you
right.
suppose that is?
Because it is such a private exploration, because it is so intimate. We write in order to find out who and what we are, and how can you do that if you feel exposed? How can you do that if you feel like you're performing? So it then becomes very strange that this activity, which begins in solitude and privacy, and that is still essential to me as a writer. I can't write in public. I need undisturbed private time in order to sit down to make the poems, and yet I end up here saying them in public in front of all of these people. The envoy. One day in that room, a small rat. 2 days later, a snake, who, seeing me enter, whipped the long stripe of his body under the bed, then curled like a docile house pet. I don't know how either came or left. Later, the flashlight found nothing. For a year, I've watched as something, terror, grief, entered and then left my body, not knowing how it came in, not knowing how it went out. It hung where words could not reach it. It slept where light could not go. Its scent was neither snake nor rat, neither sensualist nor ascetic. There are openings in our lives of which we know nothing. Through them, the belled herds travel at will, long-legged and thirsty, covered with foreign dust. Poetry is utterly metaphor. The speaking of everything through each other. All things speak together in metaphor, so that when a person writes a poem in which they even mention offense, the mind of the writer and the mind of the reader actually inhabit fence life for an instant when that word comes in the poem. And so we get a much broader existence because we get to exist with the stones and the weather and the houses and the ideas as well, the abstract language too, that poetry moves the mind and heart through so many different realms.
A few years ago, our local choral society decided to mount a performance of Handel's Messiah. This was very ambitious, and a number of us felt some trepidation about the possible results. The day of the performance, I arrived just about sunset at the church where the concert was taking place, and there was the most extraordinarily beautiful sunset overhead. And it seemed ironic to leave the perfectly accomplished sunset behind and enter the chapel for a doubtful human achievement. There's a word in the poem which might not be familiar. The word is melisma. And melisma is when you're singing and you hold a syllable over many notes, as in Gloria, right? That O bit is a melisma. This is called Messiah, Christmas portions. A little heat caught in gleaming rags, in shrouds of veil, torn and sunshot swaddlings. Over the Methodist roof, two clouds propose a Zion of their own, blazing colors of tarnish on copper against the steely close of a coastal afternoon, December, while under the steeple, the choral society prepares to perform Messiah, pouring in their best blacks and whites onto the raked stage. Not steep, really, but from here, the first pew, they're a looming cloud bank of familiar angels. That neighbor who fights operatically with her girlfriend, for one, and the friendly bearded clerk from the post office, tenor trapped in the body of a baritone, altos from the A&P, soprano from the t-shirt shop. Today, they're all poise, costume and purpose conveying the right note of distance and formality. Silence in the hall, anticipatory, as if we're all about to open a gift we're not sure we'll like. How could they compete with sunset's burnished oratorio? Thoughts which vanish when the violins begin. Who'd have thought they'd be so good? Every valley proclaims the solo tenor, a sleek blonde I've seen somewhere before. The liquor store shall be exalted. And in his handsome mouth, the word is lifted and opened into more syllables than we could count. Central ah dilated in a Baroque melisma, liquefied. The pour of voice seems to make the unplaned landscape. The text predicts the Lord will heighten and tame. This music demonstrates what it claims. Glory shall be revealed. If art's acceptable evidence, mustn't what lies behind the world be at least as beautiful as the human voice? The tenors lack confidence, and the soloists, half of them anyway, don't have the strength to found the mighty kingdoms these passages propose. But the chorus, all together, equals my burning clouds, and seems itself to burn. Commingled powers deeded to a larger, centering claim. These aren't anyone we know. Choiring dissolves familiarity in an uppouring rush which will not rest, will not for a moment be still. Aren't we enlarged by the scale of what we're able to desire. Everything, the choir insists, might flame. Inside these wrappings burns another, brighter life, quickened now by song. Hear how it cascades in overlapping, lapidary waves of praise. Still time to change. Thank you.
I'd like to read some poem sequences. We are in church, and so they are mostly in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I grew up in the Baptist church, and my grandmother was sanctified. It has something to do with when your grandmother is getting happy and dancing down the aisle and speaking in tongues. It's very embarrassing when you're 12. And so I spent a lot of my younger years poking my mother and saying, "Don't you shout," because my brother and I had to live in that town, and we didn't really think that was a good idea. Adam thinking. He blamed the woman. They often do. Adam thinking. She, stolen from my bone. Is it any wonder I hunger to tunnel back inside? Desperate to reconnect the rib and clay and to be whole again. Some need is in me, struggling to roar through my mouth into a name. This creation is so fierce, I would rather have been born. Eve thinking. It is wild country here. Brothers and sisters coupling, claw and wing, groping one another. I wait while the clay 2-foot rumbles in his chest, searching for language to call me, but he is slow. Tonight, as he sleeps, I will whisper into his mouth our names. Thank you very much.
People sometimes claim, I write for myself, and there's a level upon which that's true. But if you really wrote for yourself, you just write it in a notebook and put it away. There's no reason in the world to make sure that that language is beautiful and compelling, memorable, moving, if it's only for you. The act of making a poem implies that somebody's listening. So we're reaching towards, imaginatively, another consciousness, another listener. I want to read you 2 poems which emerge from the illness and death of my partner of a dozen years. His name was Wally Roberts, who died in January of 1994. New dog. Jimmy and Tony can't keep Dino, their Cocker Spaniel. Tony's too sick. The daily walks, more pressure than pleasure. One more obligation that can't be met. And though we already have a dog, Wally wants to adopt, wants something small and golden to sleep next to him and lick his face. He's paralyzed now from the waist down. Whatever's ruining him, moving upward, and we don't know how much longer he'll be able to pet a dog. How many men want another attachment just as they're leaving the world? Wally sits up nights and says, I'd like some lizards, a talking bird, some fish, a little rat. So after I drive to Jimmy and Tony's in the village and they meet me at the door and say, we can't go through with it, we can't give up our dog, I drive to the shelter just to look, and there is Bo, bounding and practically boundless. One brass concatenation of tongue and tail, unmediated energy, too big, wild, perfect. He not only licks Wowie's face, but bathes every irreplaceable inch of his head. And though Wowie can no longer feed himself, he can lift his hand and bring it to rest on the rough gilt flanks when they are, for a moment, still. I have never seen a touch so deliberate. It isn't about grasping. The hand itself seems almost blurred now, softened, though tentative only because so much will must be summoned, such attention brought to the work, which is all he is now, this gesture toward the restless splendor, the unruly, the golden, the animal, the new.
How do you take something so deeply felt, so inaudible as grief, and work it, find the language that conveys it, that transmits it, that communicates it?
This is the place where the poet's craft, our love of the sheer physical pleasures of language, its sonics, its textures, its rhythms, is an enormous ally. Because I might write a poem which begins in raw and inchoate feeling. Most of my poems do begin that way. They come tumbling out of me. And then, that's not a poem. That's a cry. That's an utterance that is unshaped, and it feels completely for me.
You put it down,
I put it down
let
on
the
paper.
words fall, cascade.
I let them fall, let them come out wherever they will. When I come back to those words, it's easy to see that they're not capable of giving my feelings, a version of my experience, to someone else. It's that act of standing back from them and beginning to shape the language that makes the poem start to be available to another person. This is a poem which came about when I had been invited to contribute a poem to an anthology called Unleashed. And the rubric, the rule of this book was that all the poems had to be in the voice of the writer's dog. And I thought, no, that's not a poem I would ever write. And about a week later, Bo and I were out for a walk in the woods, and I started to feel like I was like picking up these signals, you know? There was a kind of subtle atmospheric transmission taking place. And he wrote a sonnet, you know, what can I say? Oh, he's very fond of puns, as you will hear. And his poem is called Golden Retrievals. Fetch? Balls and sticks capture my attention seconds at a time. Catch? I don't think so. Bunny, tumbling leaf, a squirrel who's, oh joy, actually scared. Sniff the wind, then I'm off again. Muck, pond, ditch, residue of any thrillingly dead thing. And you? Either you're sunk in the past half our walk, thinking of what you never can bring back, or else you're off in some fog concerning tomorrow. Is that what you call it? My work, to unsnare time's warp and woof, retrieving my haze-headed friend, you, this shining bark, a Zen master's bronzy gong, calls you here entirely, now. Bow wow, bow wow, bow wow. Thank you. Do you feel that being called a black poet or a black woman poet does that put you off in a subset in a way that you resent? Are there also good things about that?
Well, the thing about it is that that's somebody else calling me. Someone said what they call you is one thing, what you answer to is something else. But I know people often say I'm a poet who happens to be black. I didn't happen to be black. My mother's black, my father's accidentally. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come, celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Poetry is the art of one human voice. And without denigrating arts that are on a mass scale, I love my TV, love my computer, my VCR. There's a craving and a satisfaction available in an art that, in its nature, is on an individual scale.
How did you find your voice as a poet?
I studied, like a musician listening to older musicians. I never felt I was going to be invaded by Yeats or Allen Ginsberg or Emily Dickinson. I felt that if I could, with my physical voice, say, further in summer than the birds, pathetic from the grass, the minor nation celebrates its unobtrusive mass. If I could say that in my New Jersey baritone and have it sound good to me, she wasn't invading me. She was showing me how I could find that my little noise that I make with my breath can be beautiful or elegant, because it's saying her words. And that's a step toward being able to say my own words.
If it is physical, if it is sound, and what am I to do as the listener? Just
3 words. Read it aloud. Read it aloud and don't worry about interpreting it or emulating Gielgud, or just read it aloud to relish the consonants and vowels and the way the verbs and adjectives and nouns are set up.
To television. Pierced chamber. Not a window on the world, but as we call you, a box, a tube. Terrarium of dreams and wonders. Coffer of shades. Ordained cotillion of phosphors or liquid crystal. Homey miracle. Tub of acquiescence. Vein of defiance. Your patron in the pantheon would be Hermes. Raster dance. Quick one. Little thief. Escort of the dying and comfort of the sick. In the blue glow, my father and little sister sat snuggled in one chair, watching you. Their wife and mother was sick in the head. I scorned you and them, as I scorned so much. Now, I like you best in a hotel room. Maybe minutes before I have to face an audience. Behind the doors of the armoire, box inside a box. Tom and Jerry, or also brilliant and reassuring, Oprah Winfrey. Thank you. Thank you, for I watched Sid Caesar speaking French and Japanese, not through knowledge, but imagination, his quickness. And thank you, I watched live Jackie Robinson stealing home. That image, oh strung shell, enduring fleeter than light, like these words we remember in. They, too, are winged at the helmet and ankles.
The challenge for the artist is to find something that isn't already, by the culture, poetic. I believe that before Baudelaire made the city poetic and Dickens made the city poetic, it wasn't as poetic. The smoke, the dusk, the seam, the little winding streets. That's a process of the human imagination taking in its surroundings and discovering how to make art that's related to those surroundings. If there's something in your experience that you think about a lot, that is present in your world a lot, and it moves you or it has power for you, and you think, well, but it's not poetic, it's not a fit, that's your job, that's your challenge.
I wanted to ask about the difficulty of the poems that you write. You know, a lot of people find them very, very difficult to comprehend and understand. And I want to ask, do you intend for a specific audience, and has your audience changed since you've become, you know, the poet laureate?
Yeah. The question is a very cruel question about the tremendous difficulty of some of my poems. I think the emphasis on comprehension and analysis should be tempered by a realization of what's primary in the art of poetry. What's primary in the art of poetry is the physical encounter with the poem. You must write it with your voice.
The festival is a chance for students, teachers, and the public to meet and hear the poets, to inquire about inspiration, techniques, the discipline of craft that produces the play of sound and spirit. There is time to reflect, to nurture the poet that hides in each of us.
In my odyssey of dead-end jobs, cursed by whatever gods do not console, I end up at a place that makes fake Christmas trees. Thousands, some pink, some blue, one that revolves ever so slowly to the strains of Silent Night. Sometimes, out of sheer despair, I rev up its RPMs and send it spinning wildly through space, Dorothy Hamill disguised as a balsam fir.
We are all poets ourselves. Almost everybody has at some time been afflicted with language which feels absolutely genuine. And most of us have scribbled it down. Sometimes we've actually put down something that we think might be a poem, and then often we've hidden it away out of fear or shame or the possibility that it might really be divine. And then what would we do?
Bronx homies are the craziest. It's true. Lined up at the fences looking down to the traffic crossing town, out past Bruckner to 95 North. From the house that Ruth built, baby, to the Yankee world of white clapboard and black shutters, and they do shut tight on the sights and the sounds from West Farms and Hunts Point. Let me tell you that they do shut tight on the sights and sounds from West Farms, the Bronx River Projects. The George Washington Bridge to America is all tied up. It's corrupt, and the toll is too high for too many. So they stay with El Bronx tattooed onto their arms. They stay with El Bronx tattooed onto their arms. And the shadow-canyoned cross Bronx cleaves, leaves, lungs scarred by exhaust, and itchy, burning eyes that water for freedom. But this is no land of the free. This is the Bronx. And the homies and jibaros be lined up at the fences looking down, thinking, to what worlds are they bound? To what worlds are they bound?
The poets out of the black arts movement in the 60s, this is where rap comes from. Rap comes from, we are the old men of the rap age. When we started bringing the music and the poetry and stuff together, it was considered, wow, we said, we want poetry that you can take out of these classrooms, that you can read in bars and taverns, that you can read in playgrounds, you can read on the street. That's what we did in the 60s. That's what I used to tell my students. You think your stuff is good? See those guys digging a hole in the street there? When they get a minute off to eat a sandwich, go read them a poem. If you go hit in the head, if you don't get hit in the head, you got a future. Africa, go back, black, see yourself. World, 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 world. World, world, go back, black. Mighty ancient Africa. Africa, go back, black, see yourself, know yourself, touch yourself, be yourself. World, world. Mighty ancient Africa. Creator of the human being, of speech, of music, of the city Africa. Africa, go back, black, see yourself, touch yourself, know yourself. Mighty, ancient, beautiful Africa. But when you put your hand on your sister, made her a slave. When you put your hand on your brother, made him a slave. Watch out, Africa. Watch out, Africa. The ghost's gonna get you. When you put your hand on your sister, made her a slave. When you put your hand on your brother, made him a slave. Watch out, Africa. The ghost's gonna get you. Watch out for the ghost. Ah! How did I get here on my back in the dark with the wind and water blowing through my ears? How did I get here on my back in the dark with the wind and water blowing through my ears? Shango, Obatala, Isa, save me. Allah, save me, save me, save me, save me. How did I get here on my back in the dark with the wind and the water blowing through my ears? My brother the king, my brother the king, my brother the king sold me to the ghost. My brother the king sold me to the ghost. You know my brother the king, he worked for Budweiser now. My brother the king sold me to the ghost. I believe that you have to read to people, you know what I mean? You have to be writing something that people understand, but at the same time that's profound enough to have some kind of meaning past, say, the 6 o'clock news, you know. I think that was Williams that said that. That, you know, the news ain't in the poems, but there's people dying every day for lack of what is found in poems. You know, so that's what I think. Poetry is as necessary as breath. Goes the nigger computers, bluely reporting, ghosts ahead, ghosts ahead. The chains and dark, dark and dark. If there was light, it meant ghost, rotting family we. Ghost 8-3, a people flattened and chained and bathed and degraded in their own hysterical waste below, beneath, underneath, deep down, up under. Watch out for the ghost. Watch out for the ghost. Grave, cave, pit, lower and deeper. Watch out for the ghost. Weeping miles below skyscraper gutters. Watch out for the ghost. Blue blood hole into which blueness is the terror, massacre, torture, an original Western Holocaust. Blue blood hole into which blueness is the terror, massacre, torture, an original Western Holocaust. Slavery. We were slaves. Slaves! We were slaves! Slaves! We were slaves! Slaves! We were 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 slaves! They threw our lives away beneath the violent philosophy of primitive cannibals. Primitive, violent, steam-driven cannibals. It's my brother, my sister. At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, there's a railroad made of human bones. Black ivory. Black ivory. Dee 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 dee. Dee dee dee. Doo dee dee. Doo dee 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 dee. Doo doo dee 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 dee. Think of slavery as educational.
Readings where you give readings is the way that poetry being a performance art, it's the way you get the feedback. And the bigger the audience is, the more feedback you get. And the more other poets are there, the more cross-fertilization there is. You take a time in which poetry is alive and touching people and exciting people, and you bring people to hear it. It's a marvelous occurrence. It's marvelous for the people, and it's marvelous for poetry, and it's marvelous for the poets.
The huppah. A huppah is a canopy. It's the wedding canopy in a Jewish wedding under which the
bride and the groom, or two brides or two grooms, as the case may be, stand. The chuppah stands on its four poles. The home has its four corners. The chuppah stands on four poles. The marriage stands on four legs. 4 points loose the winds that blow on the walls of the house. The south wind that brings the warm rain, the east wind that brings the cold rain, the north wind that brings the cold sun and the snow, the long west wind bringing the weather off the far plains. We have made a home together open to the weather of our time. We are mills that turn in the winds of struggle, converting fierce energy into bread. The canopy is the cloth of our table, where we share fruit and vegetables of our labor, where our care for the earth comes back and we take its body into ours. The canopy is the cover of our bed, where our bodies open their portals wide, where we eat and drink the blood of our love, where the skin shines red as a swallowed sunrise, and we burn in one furnace of joy molten as steel, and the dream is flesh and flower. Oh my love, we dance under the chuppah standing over us like an animal on its four legs, like a table on which we set our love as a feast, like a tent under which we work, not safe, but no longer solitary in the searing heat of our time.
Stanley Kunitz is a poet who has lived through most of the 20th century and has won many of the prizes and distinctions that our nation is able to give to a poet. He recently became the first poet in the history of the English language to publish a new book of poems at the age of 90. Stanley Kunitz.
This is a poem that celebrates, among other things, my garden on Cape Cod. It's called The Round. Light splashed this morning on the shell-pink anemones swaying on their tall stems. Down blue-spiked veronica, light flowed in rivulets over the humps of the honeybees. This morning, I saw light kiss the silk of the roses in their second flowering, my late bloomers flushed with their brandy. A curious gladness shook me. So I have shut the doors of my house. So I have trudged downstairs to my cell. So I am sitting in semi-dark, hunched over my desk, with nothing for a view to tempt me but a bloated compost heap, steamy old stink pile under my window. And I pick my notebook up and I start to read aloud the still wet words I scribbled on the blotted page. Light splashed. I can scarcely wait till tomorrow, when a new life begins for me, as it does each day, as it does each day. The remarkable thing that I feel is that despite the aging of the body, despite those aches and pains and all the rest of what happens to one at this stage of a life. The spirit remains young. It's the same spirit I remember living with during my childhood. Halley's Comet visited Worcester, Massachusetts in 1910 when I was 5 years old, but I'll never forget it. It's called Halley's Comet. Miss Murphy in first grade wrote its name in chalk across the board and told us it was roaring down the storm tracks of the Milky Way at frightful speed, and if it wandered off its course and smashed into the earth, there'd be no school tomorrow. A red-bearded preacher from the hills with a wild look in his eyes stood in the public square at the playground's edge, proclaiming he was sent by God to save every one of us, even the little children. "Repent, ye sinners," he shouted, waving his hand-lettered sign. At supper, I felt sad to think that it was probably the last meal I'd share with my mother and my sisters. But I felt excited too, and scarcely touched my plate. So Mother scolded me and sent me early to my room. The whole family's asleep except for me. They never heard me steal into the stairwell hall and climb the ladder to the fresh night air. Look for me, Father, on the roof of the red brick building at the foot of Green Street. That's where we live, you know, on the top floor. I'm the boy in the white flannel gown, sprawled on this coarse gravel bed, searching the starry sky, waiting for the world to end. Touch me. Summer is late, my heart. Words plucked out of the air some 40 years ago, when I was wild with love and torn almost in two, scatter like leaves this night of whistling wind and rain. It is my heart that's late. It is my song that's flown. Outdoors all afternoon, under a gunmetal sky, staking my garden down, I kneel to the crickets trilling underfoot, as if about to burst from their crusty shells. And like a child again, marvel to hear so clear and brave a music pour from such a small machine. What makes the engine go? Desire, desire, desire. The longing for the dance stirs in the buried life. One season only, and it's done. So let the battered old willow thrash against the window panes, and the house timbers creak. Darling, do you remember the man you married? Touch me, remind me who I am.
So they call my daughter and her girlfriends the crazy beach girls because when they come down to the beach, anything is possible. Little girl goes out in the water and says, Daddy, I'm a mermaid. Okay, you're a mermaid. And she starts to say, I'm going home. Okay, you're going home. And next thing you know, she's actually going off into the horizon. She is swimming away. So these crazy beach girls, they leave orders for the sea. Full moon comes up. You see this path of silver light on the water, and it's not your regular water. It's swollen. It has mink skin, skin on top of skin, without waves. And the movement of the water, it's like it's dancing. Oh, the sea is getting fresh with you. She's stepping up, stepping up, stepping up, and you stepping back, and she ease on back, and you step up. But she said, how come you not moving? Shake something. Go ahead, shake something. He said, okay, shake your head. Everybody shake your head like that. I'm not gonna behave, so you might as well get into it too. He said, shake your shoulder. Everybody shake your shoulder like that. He said, shake your arms. Can you shake your arms without knocking anybody out there? All right. Now I want you to put your hands high up over your head and wiggle them till they are blur. Don't it feel good? Now you're doing it with the ocean. The ocean is dancing with you just like that. And you moving your legs, you turn around with your legs. Okay, you put it down, that's pretty. Oh, that's so pretty. Okay, but the ocean said, that's what the ocean told me. Ocean said, oh, that's so pretty what you do with yourself when you shake. But the ocean said, you ain't really shook until you shake one more thing. So I'm out there under the full moon, water rolling up on me, people up on the pier looking out. And I got my core in my hand playing for the ocean. Ocean said, shake your hiney. Go ahead, shake your hiney. All right, so on three. Don't break nothing now. 1, 2, 3, everybody shake your hiney. Oh, y'all ain't getting it. I ain't seen nothing roll off the seat yet. So what happened to me is, I swore I felt so good. I was shaking my hiney like that, man. I felt so good that I swore that when I got to be the old man, oldest man in my neighborhood, I invite the mortuary, the actuary, come into my sanctuary. Everybody come on down. I'm like almost 100 years old. And Miss Sally over there looking at me and said, what that old man gonna do? But I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna shake my hiney. Shake it, 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 shake it. Yeah. So this is for you. Anytime you're in trouble, go into the bathroom, go into a phone booth. And y'all know what to do, right? Okay, all right.
Poetry is very diverse. Different poets speak to different people. Different poets strike different chords. We all belong to a great endeavor. And the more good poets there are, the more people will read poetry.
What are big girls made of? The construction of a woman. A woman is not made of flesh, of bone and sinew, belly and breasts, elbows and liver and toe. She is manufactured like a sports sedan. She is retooled, refitted, and redesigned every decade. Look at pictures in French fashion magazines of the 18th century, century of the ultimate lady, fantasy rot of silk and corseting. Panniers bring her hips out 3 feet each way, or the waist is pinched under wood and the belly flattened. The breasts are stuffed up and out, offered like apples in a bowl. The tiny foot is encased in a slipper, never meant for walking. On top is a grandiose headache, hair like a museum piece, daily ornamented with ribbons, vases, grottos, mountains, frigates in full sail, balloons, baboons, the fancy of a hairdresser turned loose. The hats were Rococo wedding cakes that would dim the Las Vegas Strip. Here is a woman forced into shape, rigid exoskeleton torturing flesh. A woman made of pain.
When I first found poetry that spoke to me, a street kid from Detroit, from a poor family, it was validation that what I felt wasn't crazy, wasn't bizarre, that I wasn't totally nutty. There were other people who felt the way I felt. There was validation for who I was. There was and I think that has to go on all of the time. The society tells you if you are not, for instance, if you're female, if you're not 22, blonde, and weigh about 92 pounds, you've had it. First of all, even if you are blonde, 22, and weigh 92 pounds, you're still gonna fail because you're gonna get older. And women aren't allowed to get older.
See the modern woman thin as a blade of scissors. She runs on a treadmill every morning, fits herself into machines of weights and pulleys to heave and grunt. An image in her mind she can never approximate, a body of rosy glass that never wrinkles, never grows, never fades. She sits at the table, closing her eyes to food, hungry, always hungry. A woman made of pain. If only we could like each other raw. If only we could love ourselves like healthy babies burbling in our arms. If we were not programmed and reprogrammed to need what is sold us. Why should we want to live inside ads? Why should we want to scourge our softness to straight lines like a Mondrian painting? Why should we punish each other with scorn as if to have a large ass were worse than being greedy or mean? When will women not be compelled to view their bodies as science projects? Gardens to be weeded, dogs to be trained. When will a woman cease to be made of pain?
You've credited your mother with making you a poet.
She made me very observant. For her, it was absolutely important that you notice things, that you pay attention to things, that you not walk around, as she used to say, with your head in the clouds. You can't walk around with your head in the clouds. You have to pay attention. And she taught me to do that as a child.
What kind of woman was she?
My mother was a woman who was not allowed to finish the 10th grade. She was sent to work. My mother had no skills. My mother could not leave a bad marriage. My mother could not support herself. She'd never done anything but be a chambermaid. She was strong in some ways and completely helpless in others. It was observing that contradiction that taught me a whole lot about women's lives.
A strong woman is a woman who craves love like oxygen, or she turns blue choking. A strong woman is a woman who loves strongly and weeps strongly and is strongly terrified and has strong needs. A strong woman is strong in words, in action, in connection, in feeling. She's not strong as a stone, but like a wolf suckling her young. Strength is not in her, but she enacts it as a wind fills a sail. What comforts her is others loving her equally for the strength and for the weakness from which it issues, lightning from a cloud. Lightning stuns, In rains the clouds disperse, only water of connection remains flowing through us. Strong is what we make each other. Until we are all strong together, a strong woman is a woman strongly afraid.